Mage Hand is outrageous. It's a versatile utility cantrip that has plenty of practical applications. Before we get started on some of those, here's the spell's description and the classes you can cast it. Now let's dive into 9 ways to use Mage Hand in your next D&D game. The first and most common use of Mage Hand is serving as your lowly, hands-free torch holder. This has varying degrees of utility depending on how strict your DM is about tracking light and who's holding what. But if they are a stickler, then holding a torch is kind of inconvenient. Beyond the convenience of a free hand, you can use a torch-bearing mage hand to scout slightly ahead or even vertically. Note that this may draw enemy attention, but at least they'll be drawn to the mage hand rather than your party. Another good use of mage hand is to interact with items at a distance. This spell is literally made for those moments when you can totally see the thing you need to interact with, you just can't reach it. Classics include pulling a lever to deactivate a hazard, grabbing the key to a jail cell from the wall, or retrieving that ring of protection you dropped down a well again. Short-range potion transport is also okay, but the mage hand can't actually administer the potion, as it's a magic item. Some people say mage hand can also be used to open drawbridges, but I personally think that probably goes beyond the 10-pound weight limit of the spell. Another way to use this handy cantrip is to activate traps. Spot a tripwire up ahead, have the mage hand pull it or cut it so that it triggers while you're at a safe distance. Not sure if the MacGuffin on the pedestal is trapped? Send in the mage hand to retrieve it for you. Uncertain if that chest is actually a mimic? Have Mage Hand open it. As for pressure plates, 10 pounds probably isn't enough to trigger on its own, but if you send the Mage Hand back and forth with multiple 10-pound loads, you might be able to set those off as well. Note that Mage Hand can't disarm traps unless you're an Arcane Trickster rogue, but it's often the case that triggering a trap is just as good as disarming it. On a somewhat similar note, Mage Hand can be used to open or close doors at a distance. Maybe because you believe the door to be trapped or guarded, and you'd like to check that out in a less risky way. This way, if there's a glyph of warding or something, you and your party can be safely behind cover when it goes off. Or you can slam a door shut to distract a group, or close a door quietly as you try to sneak by. The point is, Mage Hand is 30 feet away from you while you're doing these things, which should keep you safe and misdirect onlookers. The spell only has a verbal component for its initial casting, not for issuing commands, so you can do all of this without making too much noise as well. Another good use of this cantrip is to scare people. While the wonderful world of D&D's magic makes Mage Hand seem like a trifle, most denizens of most D&D universes aren't all that accustomed to seeing magic in their daily lives. So even with a totally visible Mage Hand, you can get a pretty convincing poltergeist situation going. Or you can just tap a jittery guard in the shoulder with an incorporeal hand and watch as he goes to pieces and abandons his post. In a similar vein, you can use Mage Hand as a fake sentry. Just throw a light fabric and a helmet over the hand, and you've got a somewhat mobile scarecrow type thing. Not useful for up-close trickery, but it might work to create a false impression at a distance. Another good use of Mage Hand is to help with climbing. The idea here is to have the Mage Hand drive in pitons above you to make your job easier and keep your hand somewhat free. Or to have it tie a rope to a grappling hook above you, but the 30-foot distance limit does make this somewhat less practical. This next use of Mage Hand is a bit contentious, but that's to use a healer's kit at a distance, to stabilize an ally who's making death saves. Now, Jeremy Crawford said he'd allow it, and the healer's kit isn't a magical item, so it can certainly be manipulated by Mage Hand. The two problems I've seen DMs have with it is that a medical kit certainly has more than one object in play for treating a wound, and that using a healer's kit itself requires an action, so a player is essentially getting 2 actions, ordering Mage Hand and using the kit, for the price of 1. For my 2 cents, I side with the generous reading and suspend my disbelief for how this Mage Hand is carrying out complex medical treatment. If a player is making death saves, it's probably time to be a bit generous anyway. And my last Mage Hand tip is actually a series of tips for Arcane Trickster rogues, who get extra goodies with their 3rd level Mage Hand Legerdemain feature, including the ability to command it with a bonus action. And I've got a few tips for making the most out of these extra benefits. Tip number 1 is to become a foe telekinetic. An invisible Mage Hand bolsters many of the uses I already mentioned above, and you'll have an easier time pickpocketing with the hand as well. Speaking of which, tip number 2 is to pickpocket or plant items at a distance. Great for being even better at doing roguelike things, which should provide more opportunities to shine in intrigue-heavy adventures. And tip number 3 is to pick locks and disable traps at a distance, things that regular Mage Hand wielders can't do, making the spell that much more awesome. And tip number 4 is for stealth operations. Whether you're poisoning a noble at a busy dinner, snatching an important document from a magistrate's desk, or sliding the jewel from a display case, you can do it with an audience as an Arcane Trickster rogue, so long as you're confident that your sleight of hand check will beat the perception check of any onlookers. Those are a few cool ways to use Mage Hand in D&D 5e. I always love reading the comments to hear other uses that you've all come up with, but I'm especially excited to hear more ideas from Mage Hand, so please leave a comment and let me know any other great Mage Hand ideas that I've missed. But for now, let's look at some common questions that come up around the spell's rules. Number 1 is that Mage Hand doesn't automatically follow you. You need to keep using your action to move it 30 feet at a time, and it has to stay within 30 feet of you at all times, or it disappears. Rule number 2 is that Mage Hand can't manipulate creatures, only objects. So even if your gnome buddy reduces himself to a tiny creature with enlarge reduce, you still can't fly them around the room with Mage Hand. Rules is written anyway. You definitely cannot shove or attack with Mage Hand in 5e. Rule number 3 is that Mage Hand can't retrieve or stow an object from or on another creature. That's reserved for arcane trickster rogues, who are also the only ones who can use Mage Hand to pick locks and disarm traps. And my final rule reminder is that Mage Hand can't administer potions, because potions are magic items. Still, it can carry a potion from one creature to another. Those are just a few ideas on how to use Mage Hand and answers to the common rules questions. But now let's answer the biggest question of the day. Is Mage Hand a good spell? My answer is yes. Mage Hand is a great spell that you'll want at least one person in your party to hit grab. It offers a ton of utility in a cantrip, and many situations can be resolved or aided by what is effectively short-range telekinesis. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you found this guide on Mage Hand helpful and can show your appreciation with a like and subscribe. It's a massive help for small YouTubers like me. If you have any stories about using Mage Hand in your own Dungeons & Dragons game, or questions about the spell's rules, please share them in the comments below. This is D&D Lounge, wishing you the best of luck in your next spellcasting venture.